Actions speak louder than words, and for these fighters, they were made to look foolish by their opponents after making the mistake of provoking them. Karma comes with very painful consequences in the fight game, and for this video, we're looking at some of the best moments of instant karma we've ever seen. To kick things off, we have a classic example of a guy who's taking the mental warfare game a little too seriously. This dude made every possible attempt to crack his opponent's mental defenses. He tried to one-up him at the weigh-in, made gun gestures in his face, and even landed a body blow just seconds before the fight. Anything to get that mental edge, right? Well, as it turned out, he was not on his opponent's level. And as soon as the bout began, he received a one-sided beatdown, getting dropped multiple times before the ref stepped in and saved him from any further punishment. This next one is just difficult to watch. You guys are here for instant karma, right? Well, in this case, the karma was delivered just about as instantly as it can be. This guy made the mistake of taunting the great Dominic Reyes, a fighter who'd go on to challenge for UFC gold and arguably beat the legendary John Jones. But at this point in time, he was just another fighter taking home sweet revenge over an opponent who tried to provoke him. And man, was his response a quick one. That head kick brought the contest to a quick and brutal finish, landing Reyes a highlight reel moment that became a viral success shortly after. Imitation is the biggest form of flattery, but when you're literally trying to copy Conor McGregor's look and style, you better be prepared to deal with the consequences if all doesn't go to plan. And for this pale imitation of the real thing, his defeat came with pretty devastating results. That shot that knocked him off his feet made it look like he'd been struck by lightning. Talking the talk is one thing, but if you aren't prepared to walk the walk, maybe leave the being Conor McGregor to, Conor McGregor himself. Some guys just have that it factor, that special something that makes you certain of their potential to be a superstar. Unfortunately, this guy, although he clearly believed he had it, was proven wrong in very quick and very violent fashion. If you're going to be this much of a douchebag pre-fight, you better hope that your performance lasts longer than 10 seconds. In this case, Karma had other plans for him, and his calm and collected opponent managed to turn up the heat as soon as the actual fighting began, stiffening his cocky adversary for the KO victory in just 9 seconds. As bad as it gets, folks. Even though you sign up to fight weeks or sometimes months before, the face-off is usually the first chance you'll have to really get up close and personal with your opponent. And in this case, it was clear that there was bad blood. In fact, one of these guys was totally set on talking as much trash as he could. Any attempts to rattle his opponent mentally could have a huge impact on the fight's result, or at least that was the plan. Unfortunately, on fight night, things took a turn for the worse. Just because you don't fire back in the verbal warfare game doesn't mean you're doomed to fail when the fighting begins. And boy, did he let his hands do the talking. A vicious beatdown that felt as though justice was being served. When you have a championship belt over your shoulder, there's a certain level of class that you're expected to carry yourself with. But for this soon-to-be dethroned champion, he seemed very determined to try to get under his opponent's skin at every opportunity. Unfortunately, his opponent was the highly underrated Mansour Barnaoui, an excellent talent who's only dropped fights to some top-level lightweights. And after a tense pair of pre-fight face-offs, Barnaoui's skills came to the fore in a big way in the cage, as he beat the brakes off his adversary long before forcing the tap with a tight choke to earn the win. The early years of Michael Venom Page's run in Bellator were both exhilarating and frustrating in equal measure. Sure, he had one of the most electric fighting styles imaginable, but for the first few years, Bellator were feeding this guy a string of very favorable matchups. But when MVP took on the former champ Douglas Lima, everything changed. Page was his usual cocky self in the build-up, but he was about to get a real lesson in the levels that exist in this game. After a strong start, MVP's unorthodox movement was countered with the perfect sweeping leg kick from Lima, knocking Page off balance and leaving his chin right there to be cracked. And Douglas took that opportunity gladly, ending the MVP hype train right then and there. Just like MVP, fighting with a weird or unorthodox style is all well and good when you're winning, but when your strange approach falls flat on its face, you're all but guaranteed to end up on a video like this one. And for this guy, taking on the legendary Melvin Manhoef would be the perfect opportunity to put that strange, drunken master style to the test. Some might call it inventive, others may see it as disrespectful. But either way, once Manhoef managed to make his reads, the resulting finish was all kinds of brutal. You don't play games with a man who can deliver that kind of power. Some guys are just looking for things to kick off, and if you don't play into their mind games, you can end up with a situation like this one. This guy clearly wanted to make things ugly, and when his opponent just wouldn't give him a reaction, he forced one out of him, shoving his rival, which caused things to get ugly real fast. Unfortunately for him, when the time came to actually fight, all this high-energy aggression didn't work out too well for him, and to say that he got sparked would be putting it lightly. A total demolition job to shut him up once and for all. Confidence is an important part of any fighter's mental arsenal, but it doesn't matter how sure of yourself you are when a clean right hand connects on your chin. And that's exactly what we saw play out here. Sure, talking the talk helps, depending on the circumstances, but big punches win fights in the boxing ring, and this dude's chin fell apart in an instant, putting him on the canvas with a heavy dose of shame. There are some fighters that just have more of a punchable face than others, and to be honest, this next one might just take the cake. Everything from the pre-fight dancing to his last-ditch attempts to taunt his rival. Yeah, it was really easy to wish for this fighter's downfall. And sure enough, karma came crashing down on him very quickly, as his opponent landed big and early, ending this overly confident fighter's night in shocking fashion. Look, there's nothing wrong with pre-fight dancing, but the vibes here were just totally off. And when the time came to actually fight, well, the whole thing fell apart instantly. There's nothing wrong with talking a little trash here or there, but when you're making an attempt to push your opponent's buttons, you best be prepared for a big reaction once the punches start flowing. And while this guy did indeed have the size advantage, nothing could have prepared him for how outgunned he would be in this fight. Within the opening round, the smaller but technically superior fighter had already put his target in a world of danger. And from there, this fight became a one-sided beatdown until the referee had seen enough. You guys noticing the pattern yet? Well, once you watch enough combat sports, it becomes pretty clear that the guy with the tattoos isn't always necessarily the tougher or better fighter. And one of the most famous examples of this playing out came when the future UFC fighter Ben Nguyen took on an opponent who made every attempt to try and provoke him. Unfortunately, Nguyen was as calm as can be, and one of MMA's biggest viral moments in recent memory, he proved that looks can be deceiving, bulldozing his way through his fearsome-looking opponent to take home a monumental win for his career. Revenge is the dish best served cold, and in this case, we can't imagine how good it must have felt for this fighter to get some major payback against his opponent. During the event's media day, this guy got straight-up sucker punched by his rival, knocking him backwards off his chair in a moment that could have left the fight in peril if he'd injured himself. Thankfully, he didn't, and when the time came to throw down, he well and truly beat the brakes off his opponent. Look, you can act as tough as you like, but you can't fake fighting skills. As it turns out, we're not just featuring one example of someone trying way too hard to be like Conor McGregor. No, we have yet another case of imitation coming up next, as James Gallagher found himself in the spotlight in a truly embarrassing showcase against Ricky Bandejas. Gallagher is a good fighter, don't get me wrong, but during this period, this young Irish prospect had clearly taken too many leaves out of the Conor McGregor playbook. So, when Bandejas managed to sweet chin music him in the face, it became one of the biggest viral KOs of the year. And while James has managed to claw his way back into the bantamweight top 10, most people still know him best for this horrific performance. For most people, the sight of the 350-pound Bob Sapp roaring in your face would be a truly terrifying moment. For this guy, you might as well have been waiting for the bus. He was that calm. Sapp is an icon of Japanese fighting, a guy who was just as likely to be a true test of your physical skills as he was to fold and fall over after just one punch. But this time, with the clear beef that was brewing between these two, it did seem like Sapp meant business. Unfortunately, his suspect chin gave out on him as soon as his adversary made contact. Instant karma and some clean work, that's for sure. You can look the part. You can give off majorly confident vibes in the pre-fight build-up. Hell, you can even do your best to make your opponent feel small by comparison. But when you get mauled like this fighter was, it's a pretty embarrassing sight. It's our first look at female MMA in this video, and though you wouldn't realize it by looking at them, there was a clear physicality advantage on one side of the cage here. And the way she used her strength to drag her rival to the mat and eventually tap her out? A thing of beauty. Sometimes it's not enough to simply KO a disrespectful opponent. No, in cases like this one, teaching them a lesson is also a pretty solid way to make your point. And after his opponent got right up in his face during the pre-fight stare-down, this guy decided to give him a truly embarrassing loss that went beyond simply finding the KO. He turned the tables on him in a big way, using all his aggression and forward momentum against him, ducking, dodging, and taunting his way through the opening exchanges. Eventually, when he had his timing down, a massive counter knee to the chest put him down once and for all. And that was all she wrote. The weigh-in stare-down is always a good way to take one last shot at your opponent's mental defenses, but putting your fist on their face is always going to be a step too far. And for this fighter, he managed to earn himself a new enemy right in the moment, and despite thinking maybe he could get a rise out of his opponent, the performance that followed was pretty dominant. Yeah, there was a clear difference in skill here, and the resulting submission proved that. It's hard to know exactly what kicked things off here, but if there's one thing for certain, it's that we know exactly who finished it. And at the pre-fight weigh-ins, it was clear which one of these two was doing the most talking. And when things boiled down to a shoving match, the pair had to be separated immediately. But on fight night, this was yet another case of an aggressive fighter getting totally schooled, ragdolled, and eventually finished by an athlete who was very obviously on a different level technically. A display of complete and utter domination. More Bob Sapp comes in next, this time when he decided to get a little too close for comfort to Alexander Emelianenko, the brother of the great Fedor Emelianenko. And yes, Sapp was definitely not in his prime during this period, having lost his last 11 fights in a row. Sure enough, when Alexander found home for the first clean shot of the fight, Sapp broke in front of him. Eventually, the TKO was called, but thankfully, these two giants managed to patch things up pretty quickly, with Emelianenko helping Sapp to his feet and offering him a handshake. A rare, wholesome moment for a video like this one, huh? And finally, we come to another standout moment in Melvin Manhoef's back catalog, although for very different reasons than the first. He made his first mistake when he tried to mean mug the underrated Alexander Shlemenko during their Bellator pre-fight stare-down. He made his second mistake when he failed to see a massive spinning back fist incoming. Sure, the fight would eventually get overturned to a no contest after Shlemenko popped for PEDs, but you can't undo a KO loss like that one.